energy delivery mechanisms.
Let's go there.
Having got the fuel in the tank, we then have to think about our mitochondria. So mitochondria are the engines of our body, and it's mitochondria which take fuel from the bloodstream, hopefully in the form of ketones, but of course they can run on sugars, and they burn that in the presence of oxygen to generate energy. And that energy is generated in the form of an energy molecule, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now, for mitochondria to work, first of all, they've got to have the right fuel in the tank. We've talked about that. Then they have to have certain raw materials. Now, I learned so much from Nick Lane's book and also from Dr. Stephen Sinatra, who's a cardiologist's book, The Sinatra Solution. And there are 5 raw materials that come up time and time again as deficiency. Number 1 is magnesium. I think of magnesium as the spark plug of our engines. Now, when my old, of course, they're all compression engines now, so it's not quite the same. But the spark plug, it's magnesium that is essential for enzyme systems to catalyze many of the reactions that go on in mitochondria. Secondly, we need coenzyme Q10 and niacinamide, vitamin B3. And I think of both of those as the oil of our engine. They are the most important acceptors and donators of electrons in mitochondria. It's that allows this very smooth biochemical flow that generates energy. Number 3 is acetyl-L-carnitine. And I think of acetyl-L-carnitine as the nozzle that gets fuel into your car. So carnitine is what grabs acetate groups, from the bloodstream, from the cell, flicks them into the mitochondria where they can be used as a fuel, and then goes back to grab another one. So, and of course, acetyl-L-carnitine comes from meat. Carnitine, meat. And then the 5th one is d-ribose. And ribose is the raw material from which we make ATP. It's a 5-carbon sugar. And if we really push ourselves and overdo things and develop pathological fatigue, we can run out of ATP. And d-ribose allows us to make brand new ATP very quickly. So those are the 5 supplements that I routinely recommend for anybody with a pathological fatigue. And the doses are magnesium 200 milligrams, and that needs vitamin D 10,000 IU for its absorption. Coenzyme Q10 100 milligrams, niacinamide 1500 milligrams, acetyl-L-carnitine maybe a gram a day, and then d-ribose maybe 10 grams a day. So those are the dosing. Then mitochondria can go slow because they're blocked by something. And again, thanks to John McLaren Howard, who's a brilliant biochemist at Acumen Laboratories, he developed tests of mitochondrial function where he could actually look and see what it was that was blocking their function, either by looking at the rate of oxidative phosphorylation or by looking at the rate by which ATP is transported out of mitochondria into the cell to do its job and then recycled back into mitochondria to be reformed. That's called translocator protein studies. And what came out top of the pops is lactic acid. So if you overdo things, if you push yourself beyond what is comfortable, then you will switch into anaerobic respiration, metabolism, which is very inefficient. That produces lactic acid and it makes mitochondria going even slower. My guess, and this is only a guess, is that lactic acid is the natural brake on mitochondria. It's what stops them spinning out of control. But it emphasizes the importance of pacing our activity. I know it sounds very boring, and when you've got lots of energy, you don't have to pace your activity. You just get on, do what you have to do. But for my pathologically fatigue, they do have to pace. So lactic acid comes out number 1. Number 2 is probably malondialdehyde, which indicates poor antioxidant status. Well, we've covered that, haven't we? Because we were taking a big dose of vitamin C and we're taking a good package of nutritional supplements. So, we've sorted that one. And then what comes up, guess what? All the things we've talked about. Pesticides, volatile organic compounds, heavy metals. Sometimes we see virus or viral protein stuck on there. But the point is, we're all poisoned and we all need to do detox regimes. In fact, one of the ones that commonly comes up there are hair dyes. The only safe hair dye is is henna orange, and makes your head, give you be a redhead. All other hair dyes are known carcinogens, and of course they're readily absorbed through the skin. So that's why I'm grey. Yes, I'm old, but I'm gonna stay looking old. My favourite comic writer is one of them is P.G. Wodehouse. I don't know if you heard of him, but he points out that there is a cure for grey hair. As he said, it was invented by a Frenchman, and it's called the guillotine. But I think I'll stick with my grey hair for the time being.
Let's come back to lactic acid before you move forward here. So it sounds like with people that are really suffering, they don't want to produce that. Talk more about specifics, what that looks like.
Okay.
And then, is it ever a good thing as a hormetic stress?
Absolutely right on both points. Well, we can now get mitochondrial function tests done in Germany by Professor Birgitta Koenig. And what she points out, which I hadn't appreciated, I'm ashamed to say, is that we normally make 90% of our energy aerobically with mitochondria, and that's incredibly efficient. But we also normally make up to 10% anaerobically, producing lactic acid. So this is a very normal part of normal energy generation. Now, the problem is if your mitochondria go down, if they can't meet energy demands, and guess what happens? If you were running a marathon and you were sprinting for the line, to get that extra bit of energy, you go into lactic acid metabolism as well as mitochondrial metabolism. It gives you that little extra bit of energy, say, to sprint for the line, which might make the difference between a gold medal and an also ran, but it's not sustainable. And that's why the athletes collapse on the line, because they've got so much lactic acid in their body, their muscles cannot work anymore. Now, if you've got good mitochondrial function, you can reverse that situation very quickly. I don't know if you're aware of something called the Cori cycle. It's a nasty bit of biochemistry. But essentially, if you produce too much lactic acid, or beg your pardon, if you produce energy anaerobically to generate lactic acid, from one molecule of acetate, you get 2 molecules of ATP. If you do it aerobically via mitochondria, from one molecule of acetate, you get 36 molecules of ATP. So it's much more efficiently burning stuff aerobically. But as I say, we do go into anaerobic metabolism. Those extra 2 molecules of ATP can make the difference, say, between a gold medal and also ran. But lactic acid inhibits mitochondria, and eventually you crash down, you keel over. Of course, the best example of this is Philippides. He was the Greek messenger who ran from the Battle of Marathon to inform the Greek king that a great victory has been achieved. He pushed himself to such extent that he dropped dead. He gasped out his message and he dropped dead. So he would produce so much lactic acid, he'd stopped his mitochondria working completely. Probably apocryphal, but it illustrates the point. But if you generate lactic acid, say from one molecule of acetate, you can get 2 molecules of ATP. But to get that back to acetate takes 6 molecules of ATP. So going into anaerobic metabolism like that is like borrowing money from a loan shark at 300%. It's a rotten deal. Okay, it gives you a brief window of time when, you can achieve that little bit more, but then you have to pay it back. Now, if you've got good aerobic metabolism, you can pay it back, in 30 seconds, in a minute. So the athletes, collapse on the line, probably with angina, probably with every muscle in his body aching. But after a minute or two, he's recovered, he can get up and he can trot round his victory circuit. But this is where it's different with the fatigue syndrome patients. Because the patients that I see with pathological fatigue, who are bedbound, who can't move, if they go into anaerobic metabolism, and it's very difficult sometimes for them not to, and they get that extra little bit of energy, they haven't got the aerobic metabolism to get lactic acid back to acetate. And that lactic acid hangs around for an awful long time. And they get chest pain and they get muscle pain. And because it doesn't fit the bill of angina, because it doesn't go away in a couple of minutes, it takes hours and sometimes days to go away, they're told, oh, you don't have angina, you have atypical chest pain, which is not a diagnosis at all, it's just a clinical picture. So that lactic acid burn is a very particular problem for those severely fatigued patients. For the athletes, a bit of what lactic acid does is it stimulates the production of more mitochondria. Now, that doesn't happen overnight. That takes a few days or maybe weeks. And this is why the athletes, to get fit, they don't want to be training every single day. The most efficient way to build muscle and get fitter is to push yourself to your limit on one day, whatever that limit may be. So the weightlifters will lift until the muscles, they can't put out another weight and the muscle fails. And they work around the various muscle groups in an organised way. But at the point at which the muscle fails, you've got maximum lactic acid burn, and that stimulates more mitochondria. So the difference between a little muscle and a big muscle is not the number of muscle fibers, it's the number of mitochondria supplying that muscle. And the most powerful stimulus to mitochondria is that lactic acid burn. But you need to get the lactic acid burn, get to the point where the muscle fails, and then leave it a couple of days to give the body a chance to build up those mitochondria, can increase their number, and then you go for it again. And so, you can, with this high intensity interval training, as it's called, you can build muscle incredibly efficiently. And for those muscles builders, I'd say take the mitochondrial package. I'd probably add in creatine as well, because that is a proven benefit for improving mitochondrial function and therefore bigger muscles.
For somebody right now suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome, what does exercise look like for them as they're working out of that?
Well, the key is the delay factor. Now, I would love to have, a fatigueometer. I could clap on somebody's chest and say, oh, stop now. But of course, that doesn't exist. So it's very personal. And the key is you do whatever you can get away with without paying for it the next day. If you're paying for it the next day, that delayed fatigue means that you've overdone things. And as I say, for some people who are very, really sick, it's very difficult not to overdo things, because anything that they try, they end up overdoing things. So it's very boring in the early stages, but I say you've got to adjust your activity so that every day is about the same and you don't get that delayed fatigue. And then as you put in place the diet, the mitochondrial package, maybe the thyroid and adrenal stuff, which we can talk about, then you're in a position to be able to gradually increase your activity, so long as you don't pay for it the next day. So that's the general rule.
If you enjoyed that clip, you're going to want to head over here and catch the full episode. I'll see you over there.
I don't think that many doctors get this, is that energy delivery mechanisms are at the root of all pathological conditions, almost without exception. They are vital in preventing and reversing dementia, preventing and